The grand halls of the Tirgzeri Palace shimmered with golden light, the towering pillars carved with the history of their empire's many victories. Queen Syra sat on her throne, her violet eyes scanning the holographic reports floating before her. Another world had fallen. Another species had bowed to her rule. The empire was expanding, just as it always had. Her generals stood before her, their armor polished, their heads bowed in respect. High General Vexor, the most ruthless of them all, stepped forward. "The planet Vari 6 has been conquered, my queen," he declared. The resistance was weak. They relied on stories of human warriors to give them hope, but there were no humans among them. As always, the legend of their return is nothing but a fantasy. Zyra smirked. This was not the first time she had heard such foolishness. "Humans," she said, her voice dripping with amusement, "a species long gone. Their worlds were destroyed, their fleets turned to dust. Yet even now, these lesser races whisper their names as if they were gods." She leaned forward, her sharp claws tapping against the armrest of her throne. "Tell me, General, have you ever seen a human?" Vexor stiffened. "No, my queen. I have only seen records from the old wars. They were strong, yes, but reckless. They relied on their emotions rather than logic. That is why they were defeated. And yet," Zyra mused, "the fear of them lingers." She stood and walked toward the massive window overlooking her capital city. Ships filled the sky, moving in perfect harmony, a display of her empire's unchallenged power. The streets below were filled with countless species, all under Tirgzeri rule. None dared to disobey, none dared to dream of freedom. The humans had been wiped out over a century ago. Their last stronghold had fallen. Their fleets shattered, their warriors hunted to extinction. The idea that one of them could still be alive was absurd. Yet, despite all logic, whispers of them never truly faded. Stories of lone human warriors, of shadowy figures striking against the empire, of resistance forces claiming to fight under the banner of Earth. Foolish dreams. She turned back to her generals. These rumors will die as they always have. There are no more humans left to fight. But before Vexor could respond, a new voice interrupted. A young officer rushed into the hall, his breathing heavy. He dropped to one knee, his wings fluttering with unease. "My queen," he gasped, we have encountered something. On Vari 6. Zyra narrowed her eyes. "Something." The officer hesitated. "Not something, my queen. Someone." A silence filled the hall. Even Vexor, who had been so certain just moments ago, stiffened. Zyra's tail flicked in irritation. "Speak clearly." The officer swallowed hard. "A single warrior, my queen. Not of the Vari people. Not of any species we know." Zyra's eyes darkened. "Show me." The officer waved his claw over his wrist device, and a projection flickered to life. The image was grainy, taken from a soldier's helmet cam. It showed a battlefield of smoke and fire. Tirgzeri warriors surrounded a single figure, a tall being in battered armor, its form covered in dust and blood. It held a weapon, a crude, ancient blade. Yet it moved with terrifying speed. It dodged plasma fire, weaved through enemy lines, and struck with brutal efficiency. The Tirgzeri fell one by one. The final part of the footage showed the warrior turning towards the camera. A helmet covered its face, but for a brief moment, the reflection of burning wreckage revealed something beneath it, something unmistakable. A human. The footage cut out. Silence filled the throne room. The generals shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the queen's reaction. Zyra's lips curled in amusement. "Interesting." Vexor stepped forward, his voice cautious. It cannot be real, my queen. It must be a trick. A rebel in stolen armor, trying to scare us." Sarah tilted her head. "And yet, you are afraid." The general quickly bowed his head. "I fear nothing, my queen." "Good," Zyra said, her voice smooth as silk. "Then you will not be afraid to capture this warrior, alive." Vexor hesitated. Alive? Yes, Vtira said. If this truly is a human, I wish to see the legend for myself. She turned back toward the massive window, looking down at her empire once more. The stories of humanity had always been just that. Stories. Legends used by the weak to inspire false hope. But if there truly was a Terran warrior still standing, she would be the one to break him. And when she did, the last ember of humanity would finally be snuffed out. The Tyr warship Bloodfang cut through the darkness of space like a silent predator, its sleek hull glistening under the glow of a distant sun. Inside, High General Vexor stood on the command deck, his claws gripping the railing as he stared at the screen before him. The image of the lone warrior replayed again and again. The way he moved, the way he fought. No hesitation, no fear. A human. It had to be. Yet that was impossible. Report. Vexor barked, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. A lower-ranking officer, a young Tyr with dull green scales, stepped forward and saluted. We have located the warrior's last known position, General. He was seen near the ruins of a rebel outpost on Vari 6. Our forces have surrounded the area. Vexor's lips curled into a snarl. Surrounded? Then why has he not been captured yet? The officer hesitated. The first squad we sent was eliminated. Silence filled the deck. Every officer present shifted uncomfortably. The Tyr were a warrior race, bred for combat, feared across the stars. Losing an entire squad to a single enemy was not just unusual, it was humiliating. Vexor narrowed his eyes. How many were in the squad? 12, General. A low growl escaped Vexor's throat. 12 trained warriors, defeated by one man. The officer swallowed hard. We underestimated him. Vexor turned sharply, his piercing gaze locking onto the officer. Do not make that mistake again. The officer bowed his head. We have deployed 2 full strike teams. He will not escape. Vexor exhaled slowly. He is only one man. Bring him to me alive. The officer nodded and hurried away. Vexor turned back to the screen, watching the last image of the warrior, the reflection of his face in the flames. There was something in his stance, in his movements, something unnatural, something dangerous. The ruins of Vari 6. Darius Voss crouched behind the remains of a collapsed wall, his breathing slow and controlled. The air was thick with the scent of burned metal and blood. Smoke curled into the sky, twisting in the wind. They were coming. He could hear them. Heavy boots on shattered stone, the low hum of plasma rifles being powered up. The Tyr weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. They overwhelmed their enemies with sheer numbers and brute force. Darius wiped a streak of dirt from his cheek and adjusted his grip on the blade he had scavenged. It wasn't much, just a sharpened piece of reinforced alloy, but in the right hands, any weapon was deadly. His hands were the right hands. A voice crackled in his earpiece. Darius, we see multiple hostiles moving toward your location. You need to fall back. It was Rhea, the last surviving member of his old unit. She was somewhere in orbit, hiding in a stolen stealth craft, watching the battlefield through her ship's scanners. Darius smirked. Fall back. Now where's the fun in that? Don't joke, Rhea snapped. They sent an entire platoon this time. You can't fight them all. Darius glanced at the distant figures moving through the rubble. Tall, armored, reptilian warriors. He counted at least 20. He grinned. Watch me. Rhea groaned. Darius. He cut the comms before she could argue further. This was his fight. The Tyr spread out, their movements calculated. They weren't reckless like before. They were hunting him now, moving in coordinated teams. Smart. Not smart enough. Darius took a slow breath. Then he moved. He darted through the ruins like a shadow, silent and precise. The first enemy barely had time to react before Darius was upon him. A quick strike to the throat. Silent. Clean. The warrior collapsed without a sound. One down. Darius picked up the fallen warrior's plasma pistol, ducking behind cover just as a second enemy turned the corner. The alien's eyes widened in shock, but before he could shout a warning, Darius fired. A single shot. Direct hit. 2 down. The others heard the shot. Shouts filled the air as the Tyr soldiers closed in. Plasma bolts hissed through the air, striking the walls around him. Darius moved fast, weaving through the debris, forcing them to split up. They were strong, but they weren't fast enough to keep up. He took down a third, then a fourth. Every movement was calculated, every attack efficient. Years of training, years of war. This was what he was made for. Then a voice echoed across the battlefield. Cease fire. The Tyr soldiers froze. Darius ducked behind cover, watching as a massive figure stepped forward. High General Vexor. The alien warrior was taller than the others, his dark red scales gleaming under the harsh sunlight. His armor was thick, layered with ceremonial markings, a veteran of countless battles. Vexor's gaze swept over the scene, the fallen soldiers, the smoke rising from plasma burns. His eyes locked onto Darius. So, Vexor rumbled, the legend walks among us. Darius rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck. Legend? I prefer very dangerous man. Vexor chuckled. You fight well, human. Better than I expected. Darius smirked. You expected to win. That was your first mistake. Vexor's expression darkened. He took a step forward. Surrender now. You are alone. You cannot win. Darius tilted his head. You're wrong about 2 things. Vexor's eyes narrowed. And what is that? Darius smiled. First, I'm never alone. At that moment, an explosion erupted behind the Tyr soldiers. Smoke and fire filled the air as debris rained down. The enemy forces turned in shock. Darius activated his earpiece. Nice timing, Rhea. Her voice crackled through. Told you not to fight alone, idiot. Darius turned back to Vexor. And the second thing. The High General tensed. Darius grinned. I always win. And then he disappeared into the smoke. The cold, metallic air of the Tyr dreadnought. Bloodfang was heavy with silence. The great warship, a fortress in space, moved through the darkness like a beast hunting its prey. Deep within its armored hull, locked away in a high-security cell, sat Darius Voss. His hands were bound in energy cuffs, glowing restraints designed to hold the strongest of creatures. His weapons were gone, his armor stripped away, but his confidence remained untouched. Across from him, behind a shimmering force field, stood High General Vexor. His reptilian eyes studied the human carefully. He had never seen one up close before. The legends spoke of their strength, their brutality, their refusal to surrender. And yet, here one sat, captured, defeated, or so it seemed. You caused quite the mess, Vexor said, his voice calm but laced with menace. 12 of my warriors dead, many more wounded, and now, here you are, trapped like an animal. Darius smirked. I prefer guest of honor. Vexor's tail flicked in irritation. You act as if you have already won. Darius leaned back against the cold metal wall, stretching his legs. Well, let's see. I took out a full squad, survived a whole army hunting me. And now I'm on your most secure warship. Either I'm really lucky, or you're really bad at your job. Vexor's claws clenched. The arrogance of this human was infuriating. Even in chains, even with no weapons, he remained fearless. You think your people will come for you? Vexor asked. The humans are gone. Extinct. There is no one left. Darius chuckled. You keep telling yourself that. Vexor's eyes narrowed. We crushed Earth. We burned its colonies. We wiped out its fleets. The great human warriors you speak of, they are nothing but ghosts. Darius met his gaze, his expression unreadable. Then, In a voice steady and cold, he said, "Ghosts are the hardest to kill." For the first time, Vexor felt something he had not felt in years. Unease. The throne of the Tyrgzeri queen. Far above the homeworld of the Tyrgzeri Empire, in a palace carved from obsidian and gold, Queen Scifi sat upon her throne. She was the undisputed ruler of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Few had ever dared to challenge her. Fewer still had lived after doing so. Before her, a holographic projection flickered to life. Vexor's face appeared, his expression grim. "My queen," he said, bowing his head, "we have captured the human." Zyra's lips curled into an amused smile. "So the legend is real." Vexor hesitated. "He is unlike any warrior I have faced. He does not fear death. Even in chains, he remains defiant." Zyra's violet eyes glowed with interest. "Bring him to me. I wish to see this legend for myself." Vexor bowed. "At once, my queen." The transmission ended. Zyra leaned back, tapping her claws against the armrest. A human warrior. A real one. She had spent years dismissing their kind as nothing more than myths, stories told by the weak to inspire false hope. And yet, a single man had outmaneuvered her forces, killed her soldiers, and refused to break. For the first time, in a long time, she was intrigued. The prisoner and the general. Back on the Bloodfang, Darius sat in his cell, waiting. He knew what came next. They would try to break him. They would torture him, question him, demand answers. He had been through worse. Vexor watched him in silence before finally speaking. "You amuse the queen." Darius raised an eyebrow. "That's nice. Does she send birthday gifts too?" Vexor's tail flicked, his patience thinning. "You do not understand. She does not see you as a threat. She sees you as entertainment." Darius grinned. "Then she's in for one hell of a show." Vexor exhaled sharply, stepping closer to the force field. "You will be taken to her palace. She will test you. If you survive, perhaps she will let you live." Darius tilted his head. "And if I don't?" Vexor's eyes gleamed. "Then you will learn what it means to suffer." Darius chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you?" Vexor frowned. "Get what?" Darius leaned forward, his blue eyes locked onto the general's. "You think I'm the one trapped in here?" Vexor's expression darkened. He turned away, signaling the guards. "Prepare the prisoner for transport," he ordered. As the guards stepped forward, Darius allowed himself a small smile. Let them take him to the queen. Let them think they had won. Because the moment they brought him to the heart of their empire, the real fight would begin. The massive Tyrgzeri dreadnought, Bloodfang, entered the atmosphere of Zytheria Prime, the capital world of the Tyrgzeri Empire. The skies were filled with warships, and below them lay a sprawling city of dark spires, glowing with alien lights. At its heart stood the obsidian palace, the throne of Queen Scifi. Inside a heavily guarded transport pod, Darius Voss sat with his hands still bound in glowing energy cuffs. Two massive Tyrgzeri guards flanked him, their reptilian eyes watching him carefully. High General Vexor sat across from him, silent. Darius smirked. "You're awfully quiet. What's wrong?" "Still thinking about our last conversation." Vexor's tail twitched, but he didn't respond. Darius leaned forward. "Let me guess. You can't figure out why I'm not afraid." He tilted his head. "Or maybe you're starting to realize you should be." Vexor exhaled sharply. "Your arrogance will not save you, human." Darius grinned. "No, but my plan might." Before Vexor could respond, the transport pod landed with a heavy thud. The doors slid open, revealing the throne chamber of Queen Scifi. It was massive. Pillars of black stone stretching high into a domed ceiling, lit by eerie violet lights. Alien creatures from across the empire stood along the edges, watching in silence. Tyrgzeri warriors lined the walls, their weapons held tightly. At the far end of the room sat Queen Scifi, her piercing violet eyes locked onto Darius. She was tall, even for a Tyr, her sleek black scales shimmering under the lights. A flowing dark robe draped over her powerful form, and a golden crown rested between two curved horns. She looked at him not with fear, but with curiosity. Vexor bowed deeply. "My queen," the human warrior. Zaira's lips curled into a small smile. "So this is the creature who has caused such trouble." Darius stepped forward, his energy cuffs glowing. He gave a slight nod. "And you must be the one who keeps underestimating humans." Murmurs rippled through the room. No one ever spoke to the queen like that. Zaira's eyes glowed faintly. Instead of anger, she looked amused. "Interesting," she said. She waved her hand, and the energy cuffs around Darius's wrists deactivated, releasing him. Vexor stiffened. "My queen." Zaira raised a clawed finger, silencing him. She stood and slowly descended the steps from her throne, stopping only a few feet from Darius. She studied him like a predator sizing up its prey. "I have heard stories of your kind," she said. "The last of the humans. The warriors who refused to die." Darius shrugged. "Guess some stories are true." Zaira tilted her head. "You do not tremble before me. Every creature in this galaxy fears me, even my own kind." Darius smirked. Maybe they should stop kneeling. The room fell silent again. Some of the guards gripped their weapons tighter, expecting the queen to strike him down. But instead, Zaira laughed. A low, smooth laugh, filled with amusement. "You are different from the others," she said. "Most prisoners beg for mercy. But you?" She took another step forward, her violet eyes narrowing. "You believe you will leave this place alive." Darius held her gaze. "I don't believe. I know." Zaira's smile widened. She turned and walked away, gesturing for him to follow. "Then let us see if your confidence is earned," she said. The Queen's Arena. Darius stood in the middle of a massive arena, surrounded by towering walls. Thousands of Tyr watched from above, their voices murmuring with excitement. At the far end, Queen Zaira sat on a high throne, observing him with interest. Vexor stood beside her, his arms crossed. "You waste your time, my queen. He is dangerous. Kill him now." Zaira smirked. "Where is the fun in that?" She raised a hand. The gates at the far end of the arena rumbled open. A massive beast stepped forward. 4 legs, thick, armored hide, rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was a Tyr war beast, bred for battle, used to tear apart rebels who defied the Empire. The crowd roared with excitement. Darius rolled his shoulders. "You're sending a pet to fight me. I was hoping for a real challenge." Zaira's smile didn't fade. "Survive, and I will consider your request." The beast charged. Darius moved. At the last second, he dodged, rolling to the side just as the creature's massive claws slammed into the ground. Dust exploded into the air. The beast roared and lunged again. Darius ran toward it, sliding beneath its massive legs and grabbing a broken weapon off the arena floor, a jagged spear. The crowd gasped. Darius spun and drove the spear deep into the beast's neck. The creature howled, thrashing wildly, trying to shake him off. But Darius held firm, twisting the spear deeper. One final shove, and the beast collapsed. Dead. Silence. Then, the arena erupted into cheers. Even the Tyr, a race of warriors, couldn't deny the brilliance of what they had just witnessed. Darius stood, pulling the spear free, blood dripping from its tip. He looked up at Queen Zaira. Her eyes shone with something new. Respect. She slowly stood, her voice echoing through the arena. Impressive. Darius smirked, tossing the spear aside. "So, do I get that real challenge now?" Zaira chuckled. "Perhaps." She turned to her guards. "Prepare him. He will dine at my table tonight." Vexor's eyes widened in disbelief. "My queen, you cannot trust him." Zara silenced him with a single glance. "He is no ordinary warrior," she said, "and I wish to know more." Darius grinned. Step one of his plan was complete. Now, it was time to get even closer to the queen. And when the time was right, he would bring her empire to its knees. The grand halls of the Obsidian Palace were silent as Darius was led through them. Tyr guards flanked him on both sides, their hands resting on their weapons, their eyes filled with suspicion. He had defeated the beast in the arena. He had earned the queen's attention. Now he was being taken to her table, an honor given only to rulers, warlords, and champions. As they walked, Vexor marched beside him, his tail twitching with frustration. "I do not trust you, human," he muttered. Darius smirked. "That's the smartest thing you've said all day." Vexor bared his fangs. "You think this is a victory. The queen does not care for you. She is merely entertained." Darius turned his head slightly. "Good. That means I still have time." Vexor frowned. "Time for what?" Darius didn't answer. The doors opened, revealing a massive dining hall. The ceiling stretched high, glowing crystals illuminating the grand chamber. A long table, made of obsidian and gold, stretched across the room, decorated with exotic food and drinks from across the galaxy. At the far end, Queen Cyrus sat, her violet eyes watching as Darius was brought before her. She leaned on one hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "You are full of surprises, human," she said. "Few have stood in my arena and lived. Even fewer have earned a place at my table." Darius shrugged. "I like proving people wrong." Zyra gestured to a seat beside her. "Then sit. Eat. Let us talk." The guards hesitated. Letting a human warrior sit so close to the queen was dangerous. But Sarah was not afraid. Darius took his seat, the weight of 1,000 eyes watching him. The queen and the warrior. Darius picked up a strange-looking fruit, examining it before taking a bite. The taste was surprisingly sweet. He chewed slowly, watching the queen as she sipped from a golden cup. "I have conquered 100 worlds," Tyra said. "I have seen warriors, assassins, even monsters, but none quite like you." Darius smirked. "I get that a lot." Zyra chuckled. "Tell me, what drives you? Most creatures fear death, yet you walk toward it willingly." Darius leaned back. "You already know the answer." Zyra's gaze sharpened. "Revenge." Darius nodded. "Your empire burned my world, wiped out my people. I should be dead too. But I'm not." He set down the fruit, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "And that's a problem for you." The room fell silent. The air grew tense. The guards stiffened. Even Vexor watched closely, ready to strike if needed. But Zyra, she only smiled. "You are bold," she said. "But tell me, human, what do you plan to do? You are one man, one soldier. My empire is vast, my armies endless. You cannot hope to destroy what I have built." Darius leaned forward, his voice calm. "Empires don't fall from the outside, Queen. They rot from within." For the first time, Zyra's smile faded. Darius saw it, the briefest flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't afraid of weapons. She wasn't afraid of armies. But she knew something far deadlier, the seeds of rebellion. Before she could respond, a loud explosion suddenly shook the palace. The rebellion awakens. The room rumbled. The walls shook. Distant alarms blared across the city. Zyra stood, her eyes narrowing. What was that? A guard rushed in, panting. "My queen, there has been an attack. The slave districts, there's a riot. Explosions, fighting in the streets." Vexor growled. "Who dares?" Darius grinned. Zyra slowly turned to him. "You planned this." Darius leaned back in his chair, calm. "I told you, Queen. Empires rot from within. And yours." He gestured toward the shaking walls. "It just started." Zyra's eyes glowed with fury. You dare bring war to my city? Darius smirked. I didn't bring it. It was already here. Your people just needed a little inspiration. Across Zytheria Prime, rebellion had begun. Slaves who had suffered for years now rose up, armed with stolen weapons. Prisoners broke free, attacking their former captors. Explosions rocked the lower districts, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. Darius had spent weeks preparing, before he had even been captured. He had sent signals, made contact with resistance cells, and set everything into motion. And now, the mighty empire of Queen Syra was starting to crumble. The Queen's decision. Syra's fists clenched. For the first time in years, she was losing control. Guards rushed out of the hall, their orders clear: crush the rebellion. Vexor drew his blade, stepping toward Darius. I should kill you right now. Darius smirked. You can try. Zyra raised a hand, stopping Vexor. She studied Darius carefully, as if seeing him not as a prisoner, but as something else. An equal. Then, to everyone's shock, she laughed. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was something else. Something dangerous. You are either a fool, she said, or a genius. Darius grinned. Can't I be both? Zyra stepped closer, lowering her voice. You think you can break my empire? Darius met her gaze, his expression unreadable. I don't think. I know. The palace shook again. The rebellion was spreading, and Queen Syra was faced with a choice: kill Darius and fight to keep control, or see where this path led her. She took a slow breath. Then she smiled. Very well, human. Her violet eyes gleamed with something new. A challenge. I accept your game. Darius's grin widened. Step 2 of his plan was complete. The palace trembled as another explosion rocked the city. The echoes of battle filled the air. Shouts, blaster fire, and the distant roar of collapsing buildings. The rebellion was no longer just an uprising in the lower districts. It was spreading. Darius stood calmly as Queen Syra turned to her High General Vexor, whose fists were clenched with barely contained rage. My queen, Vexor growled. The rebels have taken the eastern sector. We must crush them before they reach the palace. Zyra's violet eyes flickered toward Darius, who smirked. Let me guess, she said. This was your plan all along. Darius leaned against the obsidian table, completely at ease despite the chaos outside. Oh, I just lit the fuse. Your empire provided all the fuel. Vexor snarled. Enough of this. Let me execute him. Now. Zyra raised a single hand, and Vexor immediately froze. The queen's word was law. She stepped closer to Darius, her piercing gaze searching his. You're not just a warrior, she said slowly. You're a strategist. You didn't just want to fight. You wanted to create a war. Darius smiled. War is how tyrants fall. Zyra let out a low chuckle. And what makes you think I will fall? Darius's expression didn't change. Because deep down, you already know, your empire is rotting. If it was strong, a single human wouldn't be able to shake it. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to everyone's shock, Syra smiled. I like you, human. Vexor's jaw tightened. My queen. Enough, Vexor, Syra said, her tone sharp. Killing him won't stop what's happening outside. She turned back to Darius. So tell me, human, if I let you live, what do you intend to do next? Darius's smirk widened. Win. The alliance of enemies. 15 minutes later, Darius stood on the Queen's war balcony, overlooking the burning city below. Rebel forces clashed with Tyr soldiers in the streets. Fire and smoke filled the air. The rebellion had grown far faster than anyone had expected. Zyra stepped up beside him, arms crossed. You do realize they will try to kill me, she said. Darius nodded. Probably. She raised an eyebrow. And yet you still convinced me to let you live. Why? Darius turned to her, Because your empire is already dying. You have two choices. Hold on to a throne that's collapsing, or change. Zyra studied him for a long moment. The Tyr-Xeri were a warrior race. They crushed resistance, not negotiated with it. But as she watched her city burn, she realized something disturbing. Darius was right. Vexor marched toward them. The rebels are pushing deeper. We must deploy the execution squads and end this. Darius shook his head. Bad idea. Vexor's eyes burned with rage. You have no authority here, human. Darius ignored him and looked at Tyra. Your empire is built on fear, Queen. But today, your people saw something stronger than fear. Hope. Zyra's jaw tightened. And what would you have me do? Surrender. Darius's smirk faded. No, but maybe. It's time to change the rules of the game. Zyra considered his words. Then, for the first time in her rule, she hesitated. She turned to Vexor. Pull back the execution squads. Vexor's eyes widened. What? My queen, you can't. That is an order. Zyra's tone left no room for argument. Vexor took a step back, fists clenched. His tail lashed with fury, but he bowed stiffly. As you command. As he stormed off, Zyra turned back to Darius. You have my attention, human. Now tell me, how do we win this? Darius smiled. Together. The battlefield turns. The fighting continued into the night. Rebel forces pushed forward, taking key positions. But just when it seemed they would reach the palace, something unexpected happened. The Tyr-Xeri soldiers stopped firing. Confused murmurs rippled through the rebel ranks. For years, the Tyr-Xeri had been their oppressors. And now, they were not attacking. Then the message came. Queen Syra has ordered a ceasefire. The rebels hesitated. Could it be a trick? A trap? Then, the second message arrived, this time, directly from Darius Voss. We have a new plan. Stand by. The rebellion had begun as a fight to tear down the empire. Now, it was about rewriting it. But there were still enemies in the shadows, betrayal in the dark. As Darius and Sarah stood in the war room, planning their next steps, a sudden blast tore through the palace halls. Boom! The doors exploded inward, and Vexor stormed in, flanked by elite guards. His eyes burned with betrayal. My queen, he spat, you have gone mad. Syra's gaze turned ice-cold. Stand down, Vexor. Vexor unsheathed his blade. You are no longer fit to rule. Darius sighed. Ah, here it is. The betrayal moment. Took you long enough. Vexor snarled. Silence, human. The room erupted into battle. Darius grabbed a fallen weapon and dodged a strike from a Tyr-Xeri guard, spinning and smashing the butt of his weapon into another's skull. Tyra, a warrior in her own right, leaped into action, striking with deadly precision. Vexor lunged at Darius, his blade slicing through the air. Darius barely dodged in time, rolling to the side and countering with a swift kick to the general's chest. Give up, Vexor, Darius said. You've already lost. Vexor growled. I would rather die than see my queen side with a human. He charged. Darius's eyes narrowed. He had one shot. As Vexor swung his blade, Darius sidestepped, and with lightning speed, drove a knife straight into the general's chest. Vexor staggered, eyes wide. You, he gasped, collapsing to his knees. Darius pulled the blade free. Told you. Vexor fell lifeless to the floor. Syra turned to Darius, breathing hard. You just killed my most loyal general. Darius wiped the blade clean. Yeah, you're welcome. Syra stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed. And just like that, the future of the empire had changed forever. The grand halls of the Obsidian Palace stood silent, save for the distant echoes of battle still raging in the city. The lifeless body of Vexor lay at Darius's feet, his once proud armor stained with dark blood. Darius exhaled, wiping his blade clean. It was done. Queen Scifi stood across from him, her violet eyes unreadable. "You killed my most trusted general," she said, her voice calm but edged with something deeper. Darius shrugged. "He tried to kill you first." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Scifi smiled. "You humans are full of surprises." Darius grinned. "We get that a lot." Outside, the sound of weapons fire and explosions had begun to fade. The rebellion was winning, but the war was far from over. "We don't have much time," Darius said. "Vexor wasn't the only one who wanted you dead. If you want to keep your throne, you need to act fast." Scifi stepped forward, her cape flowing behind her. "And what do you propose, human?" Darius met her gaze. "A new empire." The queen's choice. Scifi's expression did not change, but Darius saw the flicker of thought behind her sharp gaze. "The Tyrxeri Empire has stood for centuries," she said. "It was built on war, on conquest. My people do not simply change." Darius crossed his arms. "Then your empire will fall." Scifi smirked. "And you would rather help me rebuild it?" Darius nodded. "Not for you, for the people you rule." Scifi studied him for a long moment. She had spent her life crushing rebellions, ruling through fear and power. But Darius had shown her something new. Fear could be broken. Hope could not. Finally, she turned to the remaining guards. "Bring the commanders to me." The guards hesitated. "My queen." Scifi's tone hardened. "Now." The guards obeyed, hurrying out of the chamber. Darius raised an eyebrow. That sounded like a decision. Scifi turned to him, her expression fierce. "If I do this, if I break the foundation of my empire, my enemies will see weakness. They will strike." Darius smirked. "Then let's make sure they never get the chance." The battle ends. The war begins. By the time the rebel leaders arrived at the palace, the fires in the city had started to die down. The uprising had won key districts, but the Tyrxeri army still controlled the upper levels of Zytheria Prime. Tension crackled in the air as Queen Scifi stood before them, flanked by her remaining royal guards. Across from her stood the rebellion's commanders, battle-hardened warriors who had spent years fighting against her rule. The room was heavy with hatred and suspicion. Darius stepped forward. "We can keep fighting," he said, voice steady, "or we can do something bigger. Something that's never been done before." The rebels glared at Scifi. "Why should we trust her?" One of them growled. Scifi's voice was sharp. "You shouldn't, but trust him." All eyes turned to Darius. Scifi continued. "This human tore through my army, survived my arena, killed my best general, and ignited a war. And instead of finishing me off, he offered me a way forward." The rebel leaders exchanged glances, uncertain. Darius took a deep breath. "You want freedom. She wants control. But there's a third option." Scifi smirked. "A new empire." The rebel leader hesitated. "What kind of empire?" Darius looked at Scifi, and for the first time she nodded in agreement. "One that doesn't rule by fear," she said. "One that rules by strength and unity." Silence. Then, slowly, the rebel commander stepped forward. "This is madness," he muttered. "But maybe madness is what we need." He extended his hand. Darius grinned. He took the rebel's hand and shook it. At that moment, the Tyrxeri Empire changed forever. The dawn of something new. The fighting ended in the coming days. Some Tyrxeri commanders resisted the change, but without Vexor, their efforts crumbled. Queen Scifi made the most shocking announcement in the history of her empire. The war was over. A new council, formed of both Tyrxeri and former rebels, would oversee the reconstruction. Laws would change. The old ways would be broken. And at the center of it all stood Darius Voss, the human who had done the impossible. As he stood atop the palace balcony, watching the city below, Tyra stepped beside him. "You have won," she said. Darius smirked. "Not yet. The real work starts now." Zyra chuckled. "And what will you do now, human?" Darius turned to her, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Well, I was thinking of getting a proper seat at the war table." Zyra raised an eyebrow. "As an advisor?" Darius shook his head. "As an equal." Zyra laughed, full of something rare, genuine amusement. "You are truly insane," she said. Darius grinned, and that's why it worked. Together, they turned to face the rising sun. A new empire had been born, and for the first time in history, humans were at its heart.